Welcome to the Word Unwrapped podcast
with Dr. Gregg Curtis. In this podcast, we take a deeper dive into some of your favorite Bible verses that may require some added context to further explain their intended meaning.
And now here's your host, Dr. Gregg Curtis.
Welcome to another podcast of the Word Unwrapped. I'm your host, Dr. Gregg Curtis, and in our studios today, we have our associate, Jesse Armstrong. Jesse, we've got a question that I think a lot of kids like to ask. It's a subject that they're fascinated by, and the Bible does have something to say, I think, about it.
Yeah, I'm as interested as they are, so let me just turn it over to you and we'll get into it. But we know that there are fossils of dinosaurs on the earth, and people are constantly studying those, and we go to museums and see them, and so how do we explain those with a biblical Christian worldview?
Yeah, and that's a good point. We do know dinosaurs existed. That's a given. Nobody debates that issue. We know there were all kinds of dinosaurs. And of course, I think for some people it's like, well, did God create these giants, or were they some kind of a, devilish mistake, or were they made by the Nephilim or something? There's all kinds of stuff that goes out there about it. I'm just going to look at it from what I believe is the two ways we can look at it, and I think it depends on how you want to interpret the age of the earth. Now, there's the older age group that interprets the earth as being millions of years old. And I think they get that from the Genesis 1 first chapter, where it talks about a gap, or it appears to talk about a gap between the time of creation, and then the earth was evidently void because maybe of a cosmic war between the forces of good and evil, and then God recreated. And so therefore, in between the time God created and God recreated could be a period of time of millions of years. And so a lot of people kind of dump in that first verse there of Genesis 1, they kind of, in that gap, they want to have all of the dinosaurs, and they have an old age view of the earth.
Right.
Then there's another group that has a relatively new age. In other words, God created the earth, and then He created man in close proximity. So the earth is not millions and millions and millions of years old, but it was created with age.
Right.
In other words, when God just finished creating a tree, you would say that tree is 50 years old, 100 years old, but it was really just created. So it's the same concept, how old is Earth? And of course, we have all of the scientific methods of carbon-14 dating and everything. People are putting different ages. And the thing that we need to understand, that with modern archaeology and modern technology, those dates are being challenged and changed. And so it's not an exact science. So the question is, did dinosaurs exist on the earth? Yes. When did they exist? Did they exist before man, millions of years ago in that gap time? Or did man and dinosaurs coexist? Now, there's some interesting archaeological evidence that sometimes you will find, like in the Paluxy Riverbed down in Texas, you will find human footprints and dinosaur footprints in the same strata, and it looks as though the dinosaur's chasing the man, And so some people point to things like that and say, see, dinosaurs and man existed. But I want to get away from the archaeological evidence, and there's a lot of that. I'd like to say, what does the Bible address this? Does the Bible say anything about this? And I think it's interesting that the Bible does have a few things to say about this, because the Bible, Old Testament especially, uses the Hebrew word tanian, and it uses that word to describe any kind of a large creature. And Job uses this, and I think in Job chapter 41, verse 33, and Job 40, verse 19, he uses and he describes creatures that are, big and dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, he talks about the behemoth and the Leviathan, and while it doesn't necessarily define those perfectly for us to picture, It does, as you said, talk about them being huge and dangerous, and it says in 41:33 that on earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. And so something is going on there that we don't see much of elsewhere in the Bible.
Yeah, and Job talks about this creature being large, graceful, and it has armor. It's like the weapons of man are not able to bring it down. You know, its hide is so heavy, thick, you know. And so you have verses in the Bible that talks about, in Job chapter 40, it says, he calls it a behemoth. He says this behemoth is huge. It's a plant eater. It dwells by the water. Its bones are like tubes of bronze, and its limbs are like rods of iron, in chapter 40, verse 18. And then its tail is like a cedar tree. Well, I mean, what are we talking? We're certainly not talking about an elephant, because its tail is not like a cedar tree.
A lot of people want to find some kind of an animal that we know about,
right,
and talk about an elephant or a hippo or some kind of large alligator or crocodile. But as you say, the description doesn't match that.
No, it seems to indicate that there were very large animals that did at one time roam the earth, and that maybe man did coexist for a brief period of time with these two. And then, of course, the question is, well, then what happened to the dinosaurs?
Right.
And I think there's some theories postulated that make sense. For example, at the flood, we know that a lot of them were killed, although it's very possible that maybe Noah had some baby dinosaurs on the ark, you know. But what happened was that after the ark settled on Mount Ararat, and the Bible talks about this cosmic climate change. I mean, it was a big climate change, because you can find woolly mammoths eating tropical fruit. They've been frozen in the north. And it's like, where did these grasses and all come from? We know that the earth went through a major shift of some kind after the flood.
Which makes sense. I mean, how would it not if the entire earth is flooded?
Exactly. So we do know that the Bible talks about where the canopy, the water vapor canopy, this water above the earth and water beneath the earth. The water above the earth, the Bible says in Genesis, fell to the earth. So that acted like a greenhouse, and so conditions changed on the earth, and the dinosaurs may not have been able to adapt afterwards and just died out, either through man hunting them or through climate change or through a lot of things that happened and changed the earth. So we're dealing with a lot of speculation here, but there is some archaeological evidence here. So the Bible, and especially the book of Job, which is one of those books that really kind of talks about these beings, these large beings, that they did exist. And you know, their legs were like tubes of bronze. I mean, that is, you know, a pretty good sized animal. Some people will say, well, it's an elephant or a hippopotamus or something. We do want to try to find a current animal to fit the narrative.
Yeah, we want to explain everything.
Well, you know, for a lot of people especially who hold to the old earth theory, they have to hold to that, because to try to put man in a contemporaneous time with any kind of dinosaur would be, well, something that could not be, according to their theory. But historically, I don't know if you've ever read this, and I've got a quote here I really want to read. Marco Polo, when he was in China, he writes about something that he saw. He says he saw a huge serpent-like creature. Okay, and then he says, while he was in China, he said at the forepart near the head, I'm quoting him now, near the head they have two short legs, okay, each with 3 claws. Now, what does that remind you of? Big animal, big head, short legs, 3 claws.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, well, that's pretty obvious. Each with 3 claws, as well as eyes that are larger than a loaf. I guess he's talking about a loaf of bread, you know, big, huge eyes. And he goes on to say that its jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp, and their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. So there was some king of the jungle that was so big that man didn't want to be around it, animals didn't want to be around it. It had a mouth so big it could swallow a man. Of course, my mind's automatically going to Jurassic Park, the movie.
Right.
You know, I'm seeing this big T-Rex just,
right.
you know, with the little short legs and the 3 claws. And this is what Marco Polo was describing he saw in China.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, he was not prone to hyperbole. He was a historian, an adventurer, a traveler, and he was definitely trying to be honest, I think, in his description. And so the question is that did all of these animals die out, or did they kind of exist on into the so-called Middle Ages, modern era, on? Are they still out there? I mean, those questions are still being asked, and I think for the most part, most of us agree that those, whatever that is, has pretty well died off, or we would see it, more of it now, but maybe it did exist during a time when man existed. And I think when you go to some of the rock carvings in South America, it depicts images of creatures like the Triceratops and all of these T-Rexes, Roman mosaics, Mayan pottery, the Babylonian city walls testify to man's transcultural geography and all of the things that we think, and they show strange creatures, big creatures, dangerous creatures. Are these dinosaurs, or are these just mythological creatures?
Let me ask you this. I think this brings up kind of an interesting question to me. I think for a long time, talking about the dating of the earth, it was almost kind of seen that a Christian should see it one way or the other. I kind of think that the Bible is not a science book, and so it's telling us that God created, but it's not giving us all the answers.
That's right.
And so I think that it leaves room for both, and that definitely should not be anything that divides us theologically. What do you think about that?
Well, I think yeah, right. And I have good brothers and sisters that I love dearly, people that I admire and respect, many of them gone on to heaven, that had different viewpoints on this. Some even embraced a theistic evolutionary theory, which they said the earth was billions of years old and a lot of things, the evolution could have happened during that period of time. I don't buy into that. I buy into the fact that I believe the Bible is clear that God created. It doesn't get into the tall weeds and talk about all of the finer details. We know God created, and we know that He created all kinds of animals. I mean, you look at the behemoth of the great blue whales in the ocean, those things are still around.
That's right.
They are massive. You know, to say that massive creatures all died out, well, that's not true. They are some still on the earth today. Could other species still be on the earth today? Not likely, but who knows? We could get surprised. Every once in a while, we find a fish that we thought had gone extinct millions of years ago is still swimming around the ocean, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't think we've got all of the answers to this. God created, there were dinosaurs. We know that most of them, if not all of them, are extinct now. We find their remains. And could man and dinosaurs have been coexistent on the earth at the same time? I think that depends on how you want to define the age of the earth. So I'm not going to, that's not one of those issues, those doctrinal issues that I'm going to, if a person wants to believe an old earth, fine. If a person wants to believe a young earth, fine. I'm not going to get in a fight about it. So that the kids are asking about dinosaurs, yeah, they existed. They were on the earth. They were fascinating creatures, and learn all you can about them.
That's right.
Thank you for being a part of the Word Unwrapped podcast with Dr. Gregg Curtis. In this podcast, we take a deeper dive into some of your favorite Bible verses that may require some added context to further explain their intended meaning. If you have a question or would like to suggest a topic idea for discussion, email us at thewordunwrapped@gmail.com, and we may use your question in a future episode. If you enjoyed today's program, please click the subscribe button, and we'll notify you when new episodes become available. And remember to click the share button if you'd like to send this podcast to family and friends.